I think Bitcoin will be over 250,000 by the end of this year or next year.
What's going to drive that, do you think?
What'll happen is that the tariff stuff will be a dud, and that people will realize that the world is willing to negotiate, and it's really just U.S. versus China.
Beyond the Valley.
Cardano is vying to become one of the major players in the crypto ecosystem in the future. It's been billed as an environmentally friendly and secure blockchain. Its token associated with it, ADA, is the 10th largest cryptocurrency in the world and is currently valued at $20.5 billion in market cap. Now, of course, that still trails the likes of Bitcoin, which is over $1 trillion in market cap at the time of recording. So can Cardano be the next major force in the crypto world? And what does the change of administration in the US mean for the broader cryptocurrency industry? I'm excited to say this is amongst the first episodes we're launching of Beyond the Valley as a video podcast, which you can find on CNBC.com and YouTube, as well as on Spotify and Apple and wherever you get your podcast. Now, let me introduce my very special guest for this episode. He's been in the crypto space for more than a decade, and in that time has brought lots of innovation to the market. Fun fact, he also has a ranch in Wyoming, USA. Charles Hoskinson, the founder of IOHK, the founder of Cardano, and a co-founder of Ethereum. Thanks so much for joining me on Beyond the Valley.
Welcome to Paris.
Charles, there's a lot to get into, and we want to talk about your ranch and some of your other hobbies as well, which are really fascinating, your restaurant as well. But how long have you been in crypto?
Well, I've been in since 2011, so it's been a long, long time, almost 15 years now.
And what got you into it? What did you see? What was the vision?
Well, I loved cryptography. I loved math. I loved sound monetary policy, like gold-backed monies. There really was nothing else besides Bitcoin and crypto that was like the intersection of mathematics, sound money, and in cryptography. The other thing, I didn't have any job skills. I studied mathematics, but I wasn't particularly good at it. So I said, what I'll do is I'll just teach people about cryptocurrencies and sound money. And so I took all that Ron Paul stuff that I got from 2008 and rolled it in. And I started originally the Bitcoin Education Project. And I created a class called Bitcoin, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Crypto. It was kind of named after Peter Sellers, Dr. Strangelove. And I ended up getting 70,000 students. And from those students, it kind of launched my crypto career.
Well, so you are the perfect guest this time, Charles, because I love doing these podcasts, and I always learn a lot in the process of speaking to people like yourselves, and our listeners love learning a lot about some of these areas. And Cardano, I think, is one of those areas where perhaps there will be a lot of people out there being introduced to crypto who may not know a lot about the Cardano blockchain and what it brings to the table. So we just very simply lay out, what is Cardano?
Sure. So I tend to think about Cardano in terms of cryptocurrency generations. I think that's the easiest way for new people to understand it. So usually that stems around what problem are you trying to solve and who are you trying to solve it for? So in the early days, Bitcoin, when it came out, was the capstone of a 30-year effort to create decentralized value transfer. So the goal of Bitcoin was to say, could we have a ledger that's decentralized, and it's like email for money, I just push a button and push value to different people. And that was awesome because we didn't know if it was possible or not. But in 2009, Satoshi showed that. But what ends up happening with the generation is, well, you get really excited when it first comes out. Within a few years, you get bored of it. You say, I want more. So remember when the iPhone came out, you're like, wow, this is so incredible. And then 6 months later, you say, what else you got? So the next generation, which started in about 2013, was the smart contract revolution, where we said, hey, we need programmability with these ledgers. So it's not just about pushing only Bitcoins around. We want smart contracts. We want the ability to decide DeFi and NFTs and all these other things. It's kind of like when JavaScript came to the web browser. We went from HTML static websites to have Amazon and Facebook and YouTube and all these other experiences. So that was the second generation, and it was really exciting, really fun. But almost immediately after they came out, people realized that we had three sets of problems that were very hard to solve, and they required a new generation. So one was scalability, one was interoperability, and one was governance. So on the scalability side, Ethereum is very expensive to operate. So people wanted a situation that as you gain users, you had the same resource cost per user. Like BitTorrent has this. More people download the movie, the faster you get the movie. More people that use the cryptocurrency, the slower it gets, the more expensive transactions get. So it's not scalable from that perspective. Interoperability is that you have hundreds, if not thousands, of blockchains, and you have lots of legacy infrastructure like banks and all these other things, and they all have to talk to each other. It's like Wi-Fi. You need a Wi-Fi moment. And then governance, that is okay, well, how do you upgrade these products? When you think of a product, you have like Apple to the iPhone or Windows to Microsoft or something like that. So you look to Microsoft, you say, what's the next version of Windows? You look to Apple, what's the next iPhone? Well, these are complex protocols. So how do you upgrade them if they're decentralized? Who's the company? It's supposed to be decentralized. So you need a governance layer to be able to sort out forks and treasury management and upgrades and these types of things. So the third generation really covered that. Now there's a rich class of protocols in it, like Cardano, Aptos, Sui, Solana, and we're about midway through that generation, and we're making great strides.
Well, thanks for laying that out, Charles, and we will dig in further into each of those three things. So I think that's really key to where the future is going. And just to let our listeners know, we have done explainers on blockchain technology and distributed ledgers and how those work. Now, can you just lay out just to also help our listeners, the role of the token, the ADA token, and its relationship to the Cardano blockchain?
Yeah, so typically tokens are broken down to as value transfer media and value storage. So that's kind of like what Bitcoin does. But in the case of proof of stake systems, you also have tokens involved in the consensus of the system, meaning they maintain the state of the ledger. So that's what you use to make blocks. And then also they can be involved in governance as well, meaning that you actually upgrade the system or vote on the use of resources of the system based on the token. So Cardano does all three. It's a value carrier. It's involved in consensus, involved in governance. It's also fuel for smart contracts inside the system. So you meter in that way. So it's among that said, it's probably the most overutilized token. It does everything. But by no means is it unique in that respect. With Ethereum, Ether is for the smart contract fuel, it's for consensus, and it's for value storage. Doesn't do governance, though. Whereas in Polkadot, it does all four.
Interesting. So just to be clear, the smart contracts here, many people, again, may not have heard of these items. They're almost like these self-executing contracts, right? When programmable contracts that are executed once certain conditions are met, and often the value transfer involved in that may be carried out via a token like ADA.
Yeah, so in general, in a financial relationship, you have a collection of parameters that are around your token and your transaction. And usually you have some form of a value carry mechanism. So it could be a token, a stablecoin, something like that. You have some sort of concept of identity. So you go from Alice to Bob or account 1 to account 2. You typically have metadata around that. So the who, what, when, where, why. And then you usually have a contractual understanding of, well, what is the terms and conditions behind why this payment is being made? So, for example, I'll give you $100 if you mow my lawn. So that's a contract. Or, I'm going to do this complex TradeFi thing where, it's going to involve multi-nation states and companies, and there's strong terms and conditions. That's also a contract. So contracts are very elastic. They can be very simple relationships, very complex relationships. And what you can do is you can take many of the things we do in finance, whether it be exchanges or asset issuance or securities or what have you, and you can represent them as a program. And that program can contain all the terms and conditions behind what am I allowed to do, not allowed to do. So when can I sell? How can I sell it? Can people claw it back? Can they freeze it? All these types of things. If it was me as a protocol architect trying to figure it all out, I'd have to figure out what are the top 10 use cases or top 15 use cases, but that doesn't make any sense. And so rather you'd like to have a programming language. This is why I like using the JavaScript to the web browser, because from that perspective, the web is anything you want it to be. So, Vint Cerf couldn't imagine what Facebook was going to look like or, what Amazon was going to look like. You give them a language and then they can build Amazon and they can build Facebook. So analogously, if I give you a financial programming language, you can use that to build any arbitrary financial relationship between arbitrary many parties on a global system.
And when we talk about blockchain technology, obviously we talk about it being decentralized and various kind of nodes upholding the network to some extent. Now in Bitcoin, there's this sort of these miners effectively mining Bitcoin, validating these transactions. Cardano works slightly different, and you sort of alluded to it there with the ADA token and this sort of proof of stake blockchain rather than proof of work. So just lay out what that means in relation to owning the ADA token.
Well, it doesn't matter if you're proof of work, proof of stake, or proof of whatever. There are three basic steps that all consensus protocols have. So first off, you have to pick a winner, somebody in charge to advance the state of the network. So what happens with your network is you have all this activity occur, and it goes into kind of like a pending bucket. Like somebody needs to process that, and then somebody needs to be in charge to bundle all of that together to make a block to basically move the network forward to a new state. So how do you pick that person? With proof of work, it's a mining process. People do a bunch of computation, and eventually somebody wins the block, and then they're the one allowed to advance the network. With proof of stake, it's exactly the same in that it's a large group of people, but instead of work, it's the resource. And your chance of winning is proportional to how much of the token you hold. So if you have 30% of the token, 30% of the time, you gain the right to do that. Now, the other two are exactly the same. You have to make the block, and then the network has to accept the block. So whether you're proof of work or proof of stake, you're still making blocks. You still have the network accept it. The only variation is, are you doing it through computation or through asset ownership? Now, the advantage that proof of stake has is that it's very cheap, it's very inexpensive, it's very low energy consumption, and very fast to do it through a synthetic lottery like assets versus proof of work. Because proof of work, the higher the token price gets, the more competition comes in, the more resources you have to expend to make the block. It wasn't known for a long time of whether proof of stake was secure or not, and it took about 10 years of research and development to come up with all the belt and suspenders required to actually make proof of stake work at scale. But now that it works at scale, you can get massively faster throughput and you get much faster settlement time. Settlement can typically be done in seconds to minutes as opposed to hours.
So Charles, give us a sense of what's being built right now on Cardano. What are you most excited about? Or what are some of the most exciting apps and services you're seeing built on blockchain?
Absolutely. We have a collection that are really cool. Like one that I really love is Book.io. And there, it's so easy to understand. It's such an obvious idea. You'd be like, why aren't more people doing this? So when you have books or whatever in the digital world, typically you don't own those. Those are rented. So you get a book and it's on Kindle, and any moment Amazon could wake up and just push a button and erase your book. So in the physical world, if I buy a book, I have it in my hand, somebody have to break into my home and take the book. So is there a way that you would be able to create a physical, almost like a physical characteristic in the digital world? And that's what Book.io is doing. You buy something, you get an NFT, it represents that intellectual property, that asset, that's yours, and it's decentralized so nobody can reclaim it. And you can do that for video, you can do that for audio, you can do that for books, you can do it with all these things. So that's on the Cardano network. And there's already been thousands of interesting things that have been deployed there. Another is World Mobile, which is a decentralized physical infrastructure. So it's basically like a decentralized ISP. It'd be really nice to have an internet service provider that's not a monopoly and not owned by just one thing, but instead it's a decentralized resource and anybody can actually provide bandwidth. It's kind of like mining for bandwidth. So that's another great project there. And we have all the usual things you suspect, decentralized exchanges and NFT marketplaces like JPEG Store. So there's hundreds of projects now on Cardano and a lot of activity on it.
So let's talk about some of those problems you laid out, the challenges around scalability, governance, and interoperability. As it comes to Cardano, it's smaller than Ethereum, fewer developers, but also it's growing. And how do you get to that point where it can become fast, it can sustain that scalability, that growth, and the amount of people using the network?
Yeah. So there's no silver bullet for scalability. It's one of the hardest problems in computer science, which is why when we built Cardano, we started in the academia and we worked our way into industry instead of working our way in industry to academia. So we have labs all across the world, one at Stanford, one at Carnegie Mellon, University of Wyoming, University of Edinburgh, Tokyo Institute of Technology. And we've worked with 168 scientists and published 240 academic papers. So we're over 10,000 citations in the portfolio. So there's a really strong peer-reviewed scientific core. And what science does for you is it gives you the art of the possible. So it basically tells you what you can and cannot do theoretically. You still have to build it. You still have to hire engineers. You still have to go through that entire process. But what you don't want to do is have the science basically say it's impossible no matter what. So the first step was building a scientific underpin of what does scalability look like and what are the bounds and maximum capabilities of scale. And typically scale, we look at it from the lens of what's called the blockchain trilemma. So there's this uncomfortable relationship between the speed of the system, the level of the decentralization of the system, and the level of the speed of the system, the decentralization of the system. And for some reason, I just can't recall the third. I'm so sorry. I'm still a little jet lagged from coming here, but it'll come to me in a moment. But the trilemma basically has these three attributes of it, and they pull at each other. So as your system becomes more decentralized, you tend to slow down the system. And if your system becomes more secure, you tend to slow down the system and in many cases harm the centralization. So it's security, excuse me. There we go. So yeah, speed, security, and decentralization. They're going to cut this up on the internet and attack me for it. But anyway, so you need scientific innovation to be able to move that trade-off portfolio because it's very easy to make a system super fast if you're willing to centralize the system. Like if I run a server on Amazon and it has millions of transactions per second, I'm probably a small cluster of servers there. But if I want to run a protocol like Bitcoin on a global scale and be very, very decentralized, you tend to have a very slow rate of TPS. So Bitcoin runs at 7 transactions per second right now with the setup that it has. So what we've done with Cardano is we've built a whole family of protocols that kind of telescope out. And what we do is we look at those different lenses. We look at, okay, how do you preserve 50% Byzantine resistance, meaning that your security assumption is that half or less of the network is adversarial, but still be highly decentralized, because we're actually one of the most decentralized cryptocurrencies, but also have protocols that allow fast throughput. It's not been easy. As I've mentioned, we've published 240 papers, and we've been systematically chipping away at it step by step by step by step. And what's happened is we've gotten to a point where we think we have a good trade-off profile for it. People optimize, like Solana's highly optimized towards scale. You know, they get very high throughput, but it's very expensive to run a consensus node, and there's only a few people that actually can run a consensus node. Literally costs millions of dollars to run that backbone. And also the chain is huge. It's hundreds of terabytes in size. So you can't have it on a cell phone, and you can't have it on a laptop or a desktop computer. But it's really fast.
So there's literally all those different things you need to balance up and say, hey, we think we've got the sweet spot.
And so you have to get that sweet spot. And if you got it right, it organically gets faster over time. You have a large heterogeneous set of producers inside the system. So everybody uses very few resources. And also your Byzantine resistance is still above 30%, ideally 50%. So usually your checkpoints are half, a third, or a fourth, and it just depends on the nature of the protocol. So there's a lot of nuanced computer science there, and there's a lot of moving pieces to it. But the key is you should build it in a way where organically it gets faster over time, but you preserve what you have. The other question is, how do you measure these things? Like, how do you measure transactions per second? Or how do you measure decentralization? Or how do you measure security? So security is a little easier because we have distributed systems concepts that have existed since the 1980s with like Leslie Lamport, all these other people about how to think about security in a distributed system. But it's a lot harder when you think about decentralization and throughput, because not all transactions are created equally. Cardano has a different accounting model than Ethereum. Ethereum has an accounts-based model. We have a model like Bitcoin does, UTXO. And so one transaction in Cardano can be many things at the same time, whereas one transaction in the accounts-based system tends to be very sequential. A, then B, then C, then D. So if I have 5 transactions occur there, it could be one transaction in Cardano, for example. So this is kind of an apples to oranges thing. And it's the same for decentralization. We created something called the Edinburgh Decentralization Index. And there we worked with the University of Edinburgh to try to measure decentralization. And we were trying to get to like a one-size-fits-all number. Turns out there's 8 different lenses that you can look at for decentralization. So you can't get a one-size-fits-all number. You have to look at it from different things like the tokenomics or the consensus or the network stack. And then what will end up happening is some systems will be very decentralized from one lens, but very centralized in another lens. Maybe the development of the code, for example, and there's only one foundation or something like that. And again, with Cardano, what we've tried to do is create a very balanced ecosystem where decentralization is extremely balanced.
Yeah, and let's talk about the governance issue, because that's also related to decentralization. I guess when we think of a company or a publicly listed company, we talk about its shareholders, right? Those who buy shares in that company and those who can vote and are on the board. When we think about governance in terms of a protocol like Cardano, what does it mean exactly?
So on-chain governance, well, first off, you have to decide, do you want a government at all? Or do you want like a ruling institution, or do you want completely decentralized governance? So Bitcoin is anarchistic. It has no government. The advantage there is you can't change anything. So, and then Bitcoin, if you talk to a Bitcoiner, they say that's a feature, not a bug. We really like that you can't change anything. That's great, but the problem is you can't upgrade. And so how do you add smart contracts to Bitcoin? Or how do you make Bitcoin post-quantum when quantum computers come and attack it? It's very hard. Like Taproot, for example, which is a major upgrade to Bitcoin that happened recently, it took about 8.5 years for that to work its way through. It's a very slow upgrade cadence. And then even then, you can't change big things like proof of work or the block structure or these types of things. So I would argue that you need to have a government. The question then is, what is a good government? And so we spent the last 2 years actually answering that question in Cardano. We created a tripartite government that kind of takes 2 big concepts together, a constitutional republic and liquid democracy, and puts them together. And we had to do everything from write a constitution and get it ratified on chain, which preserves the rights that the people use the system, to actually create a mechanism upon which people can elect officials or delegate stake to people. So on the liquid democracy side, you delegate your ADA token control to representatives, and it's very fluid, so you can change it anytime you want. And then with the constitutional committee in the system, you actually elect people. So we balanced it out in a way that you can do 7 different governance actions, everything from upgrade the system to actually spend the on-chain treasury. Cardano has its own money. There's $1.5 billion worth of ADA that the chain itself controls. It's not living in some foundation or institution. It's actually on-chain in a smart contract. It's in the system. Well, it's actually even beyond a smart contract. It gets moved into one. And so then the people on chain can control that and do annual budgets and every year maintain it just like a nation state would and pay out its concerns for marketing and growth and all these other things. So it's a very full service government, very hard to build. 50 countries were involved in the writing of the Constitution, and we're just turning it on right now. The other thing about it is that for a government to be effective, there's typically 3 properties that government has. You have to have integrity, efficiency, and efficacy. So your government should preserve the integrity of the system. So if you say there's only ever going to be 45 billion tokens and it's deflationary, damn well better be. That's integrity inside the system. Efficiency is how quickly you make decisions, and efficacy is how good the decisions are that you make. So we have a budget process. It's an annual budget. Does it take a month to do a budget or 6 months to do a budget? That's how efficient the thing is. And is the budget spending money on the right people? Is there a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse, or is there a lot of good outcomes for that? That's the effectiveness of the system. So every government, whether it be your Boy Scout Club or your Elks Lodge, or it be the United States of America or the European Union, is rated in this way. Does it preserve and protect its institutions and its constitution? So the integrity of the system. Does it make good decisions, and does it make good decisions quickly? So now that we have the government, we're seeing that. But I think this is the single biggest competitive advantage that Cardano has over every other ecosystem, because all technology is commoditizable. Look at ChatGPT. It comes out, it's revolutionary. Everybody's like, wow, that's so incredible. And now we have Claude and Llama, we have Grok and 5,000 other things. And ChatGPT, as great as it is, doesn't seem as magical as it was. And that's just technology. So similarly, everybody can write a scalable protocol, especially after somebody figures it out, or people can write a better smart contract language. Governance is really hard to replicate. You know the difference between a solid, stable, good government and an unstable government that doesn't have rule of law.
So for Cardano, is there a president? How does that look in terms of the more traditional structures of government we have in the world?
What's cool about Cardano is it doesn't have an executive function, so we're pretty crazy like that. So liquid democracy is kind of like getting delegates, and they have voting power over things, but anybody can become one, and people can delegate to them. And then there's elected representatives, but they have more of a legislative and judicial oversight, but there's no president. So it's completely decentralized from that viewpoint. And so some people think you need a strong executive function. And what's cool is we get to run the clock and experiment. Cardano's really been a petri dish for a next generation type of government where power is at the bottom instead of the top. And you don't need strong institutions or strong executive function for it. But there's a lot of moving pieces to it. And we could spend 3-4 hours talking about it. But long and short is it's one of the crown jewels. I'd say UTXO, extended UTXO is one of the crown jewels, Ouroboros, our proof of stake protocol, and governance is the other crown jewel of Cardano that really makes it special.
And just the final piece of the puzzle you mentioned earlier, Charles, was around interoperability, this idea of different protocols and blockchains working with each other for the future of the industry. How do you get there?
So interoperability, the frustrating part about it is there's a technology question and then there's a standards question.
Right.
So the technology question is, what do you need to be able to securely talk to other systems? Because, if you have 2 blockchains, you have, actually I'm here. So let's say you have like Bitcoin and Cardano. So if somebody sends you Bitcoin into Cardano or some ADA into Bitcoin, how does Bitcoin know that the ADA it receives is real and hasn't been double spent? Or vice versa. So the naive way of doing things is you boot up your computer and you have a full Bitcoin node and a full Cardano node, and yet it takes a lot of resources to run that. But what if there's 1,000 blockchains? Are you going to have 1,000 full nodes around the whole system? So that doesn't make any sense. So the first question of interoperability on technology is, how do I generate a proof that when I send my Bitcoin from Bitcoin to Cardano or my ADA from Cardano to Bitcoin, that when the person receives it, they can use that proof to verify the coins are real and they haven't been double spent. So we typically term that like zero knowledge cryptography or things like that. And there's a lot of standards and ideas that people are developing for these cross-chain transactions. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is adoption. So even if you have the world's best proof, can the other system understand it? And will that system adopt that and be able to integrate that into software? So the good news is that on the technology side, we've gotten to a point where zero-knowledge cryptography has evolved such that we have pretty good proofs that we can put on the wire to move value around or information around the systems. The problem is we haven't quite had our Wi-Fi moment or our Bluetooth moment where we have one standard that everybody follows and then everything's interoperable and then your phone can connect to it just like it does Wi-Fi and then you know the things you're looking at are right. But we've made a lot of progress as an industry, and it's helped that there's been a lot of meta-chain stuff like Chainlink and Layer Zero. We have Midnight. There's dozens of things that people are creating that really are trying to make an effort to chip away at the interoperability side, but it's a lot of work.
Is competition an issue where you've got perhaps other blockchains who are like, well, no, we think we're the gold standard and we don't really need to work with anything else?
Yes and no. But, when you really think about it, you're going to take a step back and you say, well, yeah, I could be a maximalist, but then I deny myself all the liquidity, users, and value of the entire industry as a whole. So let's say you live in a $100 billion ecosystem. Well, Bitcoin's bigger. It's $1 trillion+. Let's say you live in Bitcoin. Well, the legacy financial world's bigger. It's hundreds of trillions of dollars. So obviously there's always a bigger bear. And what you want is ability for everybody to talk to each other so that value, users, and information can freely flow between the systems. And then it's really who has the best user experience and who has the best applications that's going to win.
Charles, I want to move the conversation on to a bit about what's happening in the world. As we're recording this, I asked you about a president earlier. There's a president dominating conversation globally right now, and that is President Donald Trump in the U.S. and the tariffs he's imposed on 180 countries around the world as well. That's what's dominating markets right now, whether it's equity markets or whether it's the crypto markets as well. What is the view from the crypto industry at the moment as it pertains to what the tariffs and the state of world trade and the global economy is to your industry?
There's like that meme where the guys are standing there on the gallows and they have the rope around their neck and he's like, first time, huh?
Yeah.
When I first started crypto, Bitcoin was under $1. I want you to go from $1 to $30, down to $4, up to $256, down to $80, up to $1,200, down to $250, up to $20,000, down to $4,000, to $68,000, down to $25, all the way up to $100. I've watched it go up and down, up and down, up and down. And, the macro, it changes. We've lived through Obama. We've lived through Trump 1. We lived through Biden. Now we're in Trump 2.
Yeah.
Presidents change, macro changes. Really, the question is, every generation, are we gaining users? Are we gaining liquidity? And are we gaining utility as a system? And so the thing is, when I first started, we had less than 1 million people in crypto. In fact, there's less than 100,000 people in crypto globally. Now we have 550 million people. You look at Argentina, there's a $700 billion economy. $1 out of every $7 in their economy is in crypto. There's $100 billion in crypto there. Think about that. Vietnam, 32% of the economy is crypto. 32% of people hold crypto there. In Nigeria, it's 25%. So you have nation states adopting it. You have massive amounts of wealth that's entered the space. So while you have tariffs, that's a ephemeral concern. There's going to be a trade war for a little bit. What ends up happening is crypto benefits in the long term, because geopolitically what's happening is we're moving from a rules-based international order to a great powers conflict. Now, we're kind of young, so we spent our entire adult lives under a rules-based international order, but our parents and grandparents, they lived under great powers conflict. It was the United States and the Soviet Union going at it. So it didn't matter what the trade deal was. It didn't matter what the rule law was. If the Soviet Union wanted to do something or U.S. wanted to do something, they just do it. And now we go back to great powers conflict. If Russia wants to invade Ukraine, it invades Ukraine. If China wants to invade Taiwan, it's going to do that. So treaties don't really work so well, and global business doesn't really work so well there. So your only option for globalization is crypto. If you want to do business with countries the United States doesn't like, or Russia doesn't like, or China doesn't like in a global commons, you can no longer do that through treaty organizations or legacy banks or things. You can only do that through crypto. So when you take that, plus the new laws that are being passed, like the market structure bill and the stablecoin bill in the United States, and where MiCA is solidifying, what's going to end up happening is the big guys, the Magnificent Seven, are going to come into crypto, and that's going to bring 3 billion users into crypto. You're going to have a cryptocurrency wallet in your Android phone. You're going to have a cryptocurrency wallet in your iPhone. You're going to have a cryptocurrency wallet in Windows, and they're going to be using stablecoins. It's not because Papa Satya over at Microsoft is like, boy, I love crypto. It's he hates paying fees. If you're Microsoft, you got people in 150 countries, and you hate some local bank in Bangladesh or Pakistan or someplace charges you 5% here or 10% here. You want to get rid of that whole thing. So why not pay them in stable coins, Windows to Windows, and you're your own bank. Plus, if they're issuing that token, they could wake up just like Tether does and get $20-30 billion a year in yield from treasury bills. So Microsoft wants to be in that market. And Facebook tried and they got regulated out of it. They'll come back once the stablecoin bill and the other things. So when you look at the macro and you widen the aperture, we are a dominant force in a great powers conflict, and we're a dominant force with the Magnificent Seven coming on board. And also the real world asset revolution is going to be huge. That's $10 trillion that's going to be entering the cryptocurrency
So you
space.
think the stablecoin bill, which is something that's currently going through the legislative process in the US, could unlock a lot of value and particularly bring in Mag 7 to buy stablecoin and transact in stablecoin?
Or even issue their own, because all they have to do is buy a bank.
Yeah.
And if you're a $1 trillion company, that's an easy proposition, right? They can set up Speedy Bank in Wyoming or something like that.
And as you said, Facebook did try with Libra.
Yeah, and so they want to do this because it makes so much sense, and they want to turn every messenger app into a payment system because it also reduces the friction in selling products. Microtransactions. If you're Xbox Live or something like that, why do you have points? Why not just tap a button and you can give a tip? Or a streaming platform like YouTube. Wouldn't it be nice that you can give tips to a YouTube streamer and 20% of them go to YouTube? They want that. They want it bad. X is going to do the same thing. They're getting all the requisite licenses. So hundreds of millions will be brought in, if not billions, through that. And that stablecoin bill is going to get done in 2 to 3 months. So we're moving real fast.
Just to get back to kind of where we currently are, you don't think we're heading towards another crypto winter at all?
No. I think Bitcoin will be over 250,000 by the end of this year or next year.
What's going to drive that, do you think?
What'll happen is that the tariff stuff will be a dud, and then people will realize that the world is willing to negotiate. And it's really just U.S. versus China, and a lot of people will side with us. Some people side with China. The markets will stabilize a little bit, and they'll get used to the new normal. And then the Fed will lower interest rates, and then you'll have a lot of fast, cheap money, and then it'll pour into crypto because it'll get reignited by the market structure bill and the Magnificent Seven entering in the stablecoin bill. So it'll stall for probably the next 3 to 5 months, and then you'll have a huge wave of speculative interest come probably August or September into the markets, and that'll carry through for probably another 6 to 12 months.
But do you think the Fed has room to move if these tariffs cause higher inflation in the U.S.?
Well, of course they can. They can do whatever they want to do. It's the Fed, right? And also, it's not intrinsically clear how inflationary the tariffs will be. There was an MIT report that came out, I think it was from the first Trump administration, where they looked at the 2018 tariffs. And even though there was a 10%, 25%, depending on the nature of the tariff, the real inflation was only about 0.7%. So it's a very complex thing when you look at tariffs and prices and all these things, because people can switch inputs, people can make side trade deals, people could domestically manufacture. There's also stickiness in inventory, so people may have stockpiles of things that they run down for a little bit. It's a game of chicken that he's basically playing, and a lot of people are going to renegotiate. And I think they'll get to a point where they're comfortable with the new normal. There will be some price increase, but the question is, is that going to be much more than what we've been encountering with inflation already? I mean, the real inflation rate has been probably 5 to 7%, when you really think about it, especially if you look at indexes like Truflation over the way that we currently do it with the legacy systems, with legacy metrics. Because, things like oil are important. Beef is important. Maybe we should price that in with inflation. So it's a nuanced thing. And what the media likes to do is they like to say, it's the sky is falling and everything is destroyed and the whole economy, we're going into a depression and it's Herbert Hoover and all this other stuff. It's like, wait, Microsoft's going to disappear and Facebook's going to disappear and all these innovations in AI are just going to go away and all the humanoid robots are going to go away and people are going to stop buying our weapons and these types of things. No, it's a big, diverse, extremely intricate global economy. And just because tariffs are coming, people aren't going to stop consuming things and people aren't going to stop buying things.
Charles, what's the view in the industry at the moment on President Trump's, first few months in office? He obviously campaigned on a very pro-crypto agenda. He embraced the industry, promised a lot of stuff. We've had the crypto strategic reserve come out, and there was a sense of underwhelm to some extent, though there's still a lot of positivity around the fact that, the U.S. has done this thing anyway. And other nations could follow here. But I just would love your view on how you might assess the first few months of the president as it pertains to your industry.
Oh, my Lord.
Nothing else.
my Lord. So we went from Joe Biden with Scary Gary literally suing every single exchange, living in a Kafkaesque anti-clarity world, to a president who said he's going to pardon Ross Ulbricht. He did it. To a president who said he was going to create a strategic reserve. He did it. To a president who said he's going to create a bicameral working group and a crypto czar to pass cryptocurrency legislation. It's going to be done this year. And Every lawsuit has been unwound that's of substance. The Coinbase lawsuit, the XRP lawsuit, the Kraken lawsuit, the OKX is settled. The industry's healing, and it was horrible under the Biden administration. So I appreciate that some people are underwhelmed. I think that comes from sour grapes because they expected a bull run. But it's not going to happen right now. There's too much stuff going on. There's too much uncertainty going on. There's still a war in Ukraine. There's still a war in the Middle East. There's a lot of fear over trade. There's great powers conflict. Crypto's not immune to the macro, and we have to get through all of that macro, and we have to kind of figure that stuff out. So after we get about 6 months in, 12 months in, we'll start getting some more stability. We'll start getting some more regularity in things. And then at that juncture, I think then we can start taking advantage of the legislation and the structural stuff. As for the U.S. Reserve, going from we're going to divest 212,000 Bitcoin and the government's going after crypto to the government's now going to hold it and we're going to try to find a legislative framework to buy it over the next 3 to 5 years, that's a massive leap forward. And so I don't know what more people want out of this. It's as good as it gets.
Charles, there was a time when this strategic reserve was being discussed where ADA and other cryptocurrencies were named as potentially being part of this reserve. That didn't materialize. How did that conversation come about?
I have no idea. I woke up on Sunday. I had 150 messages in my phone, and they say, "Congratulations, you must be the Trump whisperer." I say, "Oh, God, what did I do?" And they said, "ADA's in the reserve." I said, "What?" If anybody asked me, I would have said Bitcoin is probably the way to start. You need to create a rule system for inclusion and exclusion for this. But I wouldn't say ADA's been discounted or removed. It's just the government holds more than 100 cryptocurrencies through civil asset forfeiture. And so the first step is to say, okay, the things the government already holds, just don't sell that. And then a broader question is, how should the government interface with the market to buy it? I think probably what they should do is purchase through indexes like Coinbase 50 or these types of things, because then you already have kind of everything figured out. You have the balancing figured out, and it just becomes a strategic asset that you purchase and hold. Otherwise, you have to get into a rating and scoring, and there's a lot of really complex questions you have to answer, and also the market disruptions. If the government goes and rebalance its portfolio and sell, catastrophic for the market. Or if they purchase, you saw with ADA, it was like 71%.
So buying an ETF kind of product?
Yeah, exactly right.
Like
and so I think Coinbase 50 or these types of things are probably the way to go if they want to take a position. And it kind of solves and sidesteps all those difficult questions of rating and scoring and balancing and these things. You're just holding an asset. The other thing is, does the government want to hold it from a speculative viewpoint, or do they want to hold it from a utility viewpoint? Because these are also fuels to do things. Like you can run a nation's elections on Cardano. So you could buy ADA to basically use to pay to run national elections, as an example, or whatever you want to do.
You mentioned the Mag 7. You believe that they may begin to get into stablecoins once that bill is passed. Is that something you think the U.S. government may also get into, buying stablecoins?
Oh, they don't need to. I mean, they issue coins. They're beyond stablecoins. Stablecoins are a way for the U.S. government to expand the U.S. dollar into jurisdictions they can't touch easily. So, you look at El Salvador, it's a dollarized economy, and you get stablecoins, and you have U.S. dollars basically floating around, but it's a digital asset through a third party. Same for the Middle East, same for Africa. So, and Central Asia in particular, like Mongolia, Kazakhstan, other places. So I think the U.S. government, all they really have to do is just open the floodgates and let people dollarize, and you extend the U.S. dollar into places where it doesn't normally touch. And actually, it's a big competitive hedge against the digital yuan. So really where stablecoins are going to be most useful is against Belt and Road and that whole initiative and the digital yuan initiative.
Charles, I know a lot of these conversations are sensitive, but can you give me a sense of what you're talking to, if at all, the Trump administration about, and David Sachs
No,
about
we don't
the
talk to
future?
Trump. We talk mostly on the legislative side. I mean, we've certainly engaged from time to time with the executive branch, but they keep their own counsel, and it's a very hard to get a sense of what they want to do, per se. The big things that I've been doing is talking to Tim Scott over at the Senate and talking to the House, because we're thinking in terms of frameworks that are multi-administration. The Securities Exchange Act of 1933 was passed 92 years ago. FDR signed it into law, and Kennedy's grandfather was the first chairman. So it gives you a sense of how long these things can be around. So yeah, it's great for Trump to like it, but come January of 2029, there'll be a new president. And whatever laws are passed, we still have to live with those, and that new president will be under them. So a lot of our efforts have been on the legislative side, and we have a legislative working group we're kind of putting together for that. And we've already had a lot of extensive conversations. And the big markup is going to be on the market structure bill. So that's coming right after the stablecoin bill. And that's everything, whether it's security or a commodity, and do they want to do a reserve, and Do they want to, what's the tax policy and all this other stuff? And there's been a lot of stuff said, like no tax on American crypto and all this stuff. And that's where the big words have to translate into actual legislation and actual law. And that's where the rubber hits the road. It's a very complicated thing.
Charles, you spoke a lot about the utility of Cardano and ADA. Can I just quickly talk about Bitcoin? As you mentioned that you believe that this could hit 250K in the future. Do you think, given what we're seeing in terms of the development of technology in some of these other blockchains and in Cardano, that Bitcoin has a future?
Yes. I used to think it didn't, but when Taproot came and Bitcoin DeFi came, Bitcoin now has the ability to pay yield. Because people can flip a switch, they can turn on Bitcoin and DeFi, and they get yield from their Bitcoin. Nation states are buying Bitcoin, ETFs are buying Bitcoin. There's too much retail interest in it. There's too much structural liquidity in it. It's really a question of, can they get a smart contract layer? And because of Taproot, they can. So Cardano's playing very aggressively with Bitcoin DeFi. We're trying to be the DeFi mode for Bitcoin. But there's other people chasing it as well, like Stacks and dozens of other projects. There's already $5.8 billion in TVL from the Bitcoin side. They're not even trying. So when you pull that lever and you get 5 or 10% of the supply involved in that, that'll be larger than the entire market cap. The TVL will be larger than the entire market cap of Solana or potentially even Ethereum. It's a 4 times the size of Ethereum and Solana, the market opportunity there. So I think it'll have to be done through layer 2s and through other systems, but Bitcoin will do that because people want the money.
Charles, just as we close out this conversation, I want to spend a bit of time speaking about yourself and the lessons you've learned over the more than decade in this industry. We don't need to go into a lot of the stories you've spoken about publicly as well around Ethereum and the founding teams there and the public exchanges you've had with the teams there. But I just would love to get your thoughts on what you've learned through this whole process and your feelings now towards that team, towards the project, towards the technology for the future.
So I think the number one thing is that principles matter. If you want to survive in this industry, you can't focus on the price. You have to focus on utility and principles. And you have to think generationally. And you always have to be saying, okay, what's the next step? What's the next movement? So, I was fortunate enough to be in the middle part of the first generation. And there was just adoption and education. So I started the Bitcoin Education Project and leveraged that. And then I came in and helped establish the second generation, which was smart contracts. And I've now been a major participant in the third generation with scalability, interoperability, and governance. Now we're getting into the fourth generation where we're worried about computational privacy and abstraction and identity. But you always have to be thinking, like, what's the next major problem to solve? And why are you here? At the end of the day, I've never lost sight of the fact that the purpose of cryptocurrencies is to give the world economic, political, and social systems that can't be evil by their design. I want every person to be their own bank. I want every person to own their own money. I want every person to be in charge of their own identity. I want people to actually know that when they have something, there's real value there. There's sound money there. And it didn't matter if when I was doing my TED Talk back in the day or, when Satoshi launched Bitcoin or whatever to where we're at today, that is an immutable truth that carries through. If you don't have that intention, you won't survive in crypto because it's too hard. There's too many ups and downs. There's too much volatility. All the brutal regulation, all these things. There's the next flavor of the week. Solana was hot shit, and then Cardano was hot shit, and then Solana became hot shit again. Now you got SWI, and that's the hot shit. Aptos is the hot shit. Maybe it'll be the next MacGuffin. Like everybody's better, faster, and cheaper. And what keeps Cardano relevant, what keeps Bitcoin relevant, is the principles. And that's what matters the most. And as long as people believe in it, it'll continue to grow and thrive, and people are willing to put in the time. Because all this stuff requires a lot of effort. You have to read documents. You have to educate yourself. You have to invent new technology. You have to convince people. You have to, go sit at the coffee shop next to somebody and say crypto matters. And it can't be because you made a 5X on something. That's not sustainable. Then that's not practical. It has to be because that person says, boy, I'm really angry about this thing in society, like rent discrimination or high fees of the banks. Or they just told me, like I saw a video the other day, somebody in the UK, they want to buy a 2,500 pound motorbike and they're on the phone with the bank and they're trying to withdraw cash to do it. And the bank won't let them do it. I don't want to live in a world where I have all this money and then I have to argue with the bank over whether I'm allowed to spend my own money or not. My God, it just makes so much sense to go to crypto where I control that, not a bank. Or like when COVID happened and all the people got deplatformed when they said, hey, COVID was made in a lab and then Facebook would ban their account or something like that. I don't want to live in a lab that some person I've never met is the arbiter of truth and gets to decide what I'm allowed to say or do. So that's the principles that really matter. And crypto is the only option to guarantee that Yeah, because the politicians will always let you down. Nations will always let you down. Big corporations will always screw you in the event, but crypto never will. It's always going to be your friend.
And Charles, can I just get your take on your own leadership on the future of Cardano and where you see that going? I just want to take on two things, right? One was a recent thing on X where you had a follower calling you a cancer for Cardano, and you asked your followers, and we won't get into results, but the question was brought on a lot of forums about, whether you need to be so public or whether you need to be sort of using that rhetoric. And I just wanted to get your take on perhaps how you would
Twitter's not life.
No.
Twitter's not life. Life is this. We talk to people, we get to know people, we build things. Twitter is tremendously valuable for distributing a lot of information. And if people think the person tweeting and the tweets are a complete representation of what a person believes and does, they're deluded in their own head. First off, half the people tweeting on Twitter are bots. They don't even exist. And as for polls, it's like if bots are voting in polls, who cares? It's not a real meaningful representation. Decentralization is another one of those principles you have to be committed to. The goal of a founder is to get out of the way. The founder has to build the protocol. The founder has to set the rules up and has to get enough people to believe in them so that those people can take a leadership role. And every year it has to decentralize. Every year you have to be growing. So we went from 3 core entities to 1,000 DREPs to a constitution to a constitutional committee. And that's where we're at. 2025 will be 5 to 10 times more decentralized by 2030.
And you've spoken about handing it, Cardano over to the community.
Of course, and it's totally controlled by them. I have no governance function anymore. I don't have any governance keys or anything else like that.
So all the things we've spoken about over the last 45 minutes around the decentralization is moving towards the world in where you're talking about handing over Cardano to the community.
And it's been done, and there's a constitution, there's all these other things. And if I wake up tomorrow and say, you know what, I don't like it, I'm going to change it, I can't anymore. I don't have that power. If I die tomorrow, Cardano's still going to be here. And that's what Satoshi did with Bitcoin. You have to learn when to be in the room and when not to be in the room. And you also have to be genuine. As much as people criticize the rhetoric, people know who I am. And they know what I believe and what I stand for. They know my personality. They know that I fight. And if you politically agree or disagree, okay, great. But at least you know who I am. It's why people either love or hate Elon Musk, but at least they know him as a person, and Bill Gates, no one knows who that guy is. He's going out and giving vaccines and saving people in Africa, and he's wearing the sweater, and he's got the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and everybody's like, oh, he's trying to kill us. And some people like him, but there's a lack of genuineness about it because everything is manufactured in a lab with media relations people, and it's highly polished, and every word is tested and say, should I say this phrase or this phrase? And you're not getting the real person. You're getting a manufactured person. Whereas Musk, you're just getting the real person. You're getting hot takes with him. And for better or for worse, that is who he is. And yet people trust him. He's drilling holes in people's skulls and putting wires into their brain with Neuralink. And yet they trust him to do that. Some people hate him. Some people love him. But at least that's genuine. And I think that's the only way you can be these days. Now, that doesn't excuse poor style. There's always... You have to be self-reflective of, am I being an effective communicator? Am I being alienating or welcoming? And you can't believe that just because you say it, it's always right. You have to always be conscious of, can I use a different medium, a different message, or can I interact with people in more productive ways? And I've admitted in the past that there's been some things I've done that I wish I could have gotten a double take in, but we all wish that. And frankly speaking, had Steve Jobs or any of these guys in the 70s and 80s who built the computing revolution had Twitter, I don't think they would have survived. Could you imagine Steve Jobs tweeting in 1970s and 1980s and 1990s? It'd have been an unmitigated disaster. So I've had to figure out how to change my relationship with it. I'm still trying to figure that out. I love the genuine components, but I don't want to turn into Elon Musk where you just get this echo chamber of sycophantism and these other problems. And he's caused a lot of harm for Tesla with the things that he's done.
Yeah.
I think there's a healthy balance between those two. But if you go too far in one direction, you end up being a fake person like Gates. And if you go too far in the other direction, you end up becoming a crazy person like Musk. So I got to figure that out. And that's what we're all trying to figure out in the cryptocurrency industry.
Recently, you mentioned it, Musk's brand has been bad for the Tesla brand, and we've seen that in sales. What about Musk's influence on the world of crypto? Has it been good or bad?
That's the crazy part. He just did Doge, but we've all been waiting in the industry for Musk to actually come in. Every year we're like, this is going to be the year that he does it. Like X is getting all these money service business licenses. So we said, oh, he's going to do a cryptocurrency wallet and a stablecoin and all this other stuff. It hasn't happened yet. We've been waiting for him to come in. He's a dabbler in crypto, and he's pumped some things and he's done some things, but it's sad because there's so much that Tesla could contribute. There's so much Grok could contribute. Like Grok, XAI, they could be a decentralized artificial intelligence. That'd be really cool and interesting. Or Twitter could be a decentralized social network, and that'd be really interesting, or with Tesla, they could do all kinds of cool stuff with crypto in their supply chain, especially proving the batteries aren't sourced from bad places in Congo or something like that, where kids are involved in the harvesting. They just haven't done any of that. And that's sad because they have all the people, the knowledge, the wherewithal. I hope at some point he gets involved, but, maybe because he can't control it. He has this thing where every time he gets involved, he wants to be the guy and the center point and the center of attention. He tried to do that with Doge, and the Doge community wouldn't let him be the face and center. And then he kind of backed off a little bit.
I teased it at the start of the show, just as we close out the show. Your hobbies, your ranch in Wyoming, a restaurant, a whiskey bar as well. Is that right?
Yeah, we're working on it. We got a whiskey bar and cigar bar that we're working on called Nessie's up in Wheeland.
Is that what you enjoy doing? Yeah. Downtime?
Half my time is in crypto. The other half my time is in non-crypto. And the non-crypto stuff is medicine. I have a clinic in Gillette, Wyoming with 13,000 patients and 40 providers. And we do anti-aging and regenerative medicine and just general healthcare as well. I got a synthetic biology company where we're genetically engineering plants and doing interesting things there. I got a bison herd. I got 11,000 acres with a bunch of bison. And then restaurants, because, the places where I live have bad restaurants. And so I build restaurants because I want good food. I'm a fat guy, so I gotta eat that stuff. But you got to keep it lively. I'm just as interested in human consciousness and brain-computer interfaces and metaphysics and esotericism as I am interested in crypto or interested in medicine. And society should reward people for this. The one thing the Europeans have on us Americans is they had this great legacy of the polymath who would, like Leibniz or Da Vinci or whatever, they'd go and learn a lot of stuff about different things. And you're considered a well-rounded person if you did that. Whereas in America, we just worship hyper-specialization. You can't just be a surgeon. You have to be a brain surgeon who specializes in one very particular procedure on 8-year-olds, but not 9-year-olds. I mean, this is America's hyper-specialization. And it makes you a very boring person, because outside of that thing, it's like you have nothing to contribute for any other conversation. So I try to be well-rounded and read extensively about many different topics.
Charles, it's been a pleasure to meet you, to speak to you. Thank you for being so generous with your time.
It's been a lot of fun.
Great. That was Charles Hoskinson there. And that's it for this episode of Beyond the Valley. Remember, you can email us at beyondthevalley@cnbc.com if you have any thoughts on this episode, anything Charles has spoken about here as well. And follow, comment, and subscribe as well. Goodbye.
Beyond the Valley.